a reducer takes a current state or it keeps track of the current state, and when an action comes in, it will perform some operation and return new state. So these are pure functions. They should not mutate state, as we've spent quite a bit of time talking about this. So every time an action is performed, you are getting a new immutable state that gets passed down to the rest of your application. And so how this works is you have the store, and it can flow through a service back into your component, or in some cases, it can flow straight down into a component directly.
I want to poke one point on the whole pure function thing. So when you said pure function, you didn't mean like, oh, it's a function. No, it's a pure function. It doesn't cause any side effects to anything else. It doesn't reach out and change a closure or anything like that. It does the same thing, given the same arguments. There's no side effects. It doesn't make a call to a server or anything like that. It doesn't call another function. It's just a pure function that returns the same thing, given the same thing.
Yep.
Cue the pitch for functional light.
Yes. By the way, my best friend Kyle Simpson actually just released a front-end master's workshop called Functional Light. It's excellent. Did I do okay?
Yes.
All right. I'm like, are Mark and I still friends? Just kidding. So in this case, just from the graphic standpoint, we'll just look at this kind of in pictures. So the selected item exists in the store, then it gets consumed in the app component, and then it goes to the item's detail component for editing. For items, we have the items collection, as we saw in the App Store interface, which then goes through the item service. So that's where we're consuming it, but then we're passing that collection or that observable to the app component that then is going into the items component to be rendered as a list. And so everything flows down to items detail component and items component, which are by nature very dumb. They just have inputs. Something happens, we output. And then app component would be the smart component that coordinates all of that together. But because selected item is essentially a setter, I did not wrap that in a service. So you may or may not want to do that. For the sake of demonstration, I just left it out for simplicity, because it's basically, here's this new item, just replace it, give me a new one. But anytime selected item changes, that it changes in the store, and then just that observable streams down, and your components react to it. And so you can see here, selected item, that now we have this reducer. It comes in, and we have this action with type and payload, depending on the type. In this case, it's just select item, that we return the payload, and that is new state. And then now the question is, we have these reducers. How do we make this known to our application? So we make this available using or registering them with provide store in your whatever file you're using to bootstrap your application. And you can also register the initial state with that. And here's an example of this. So we just import provide store, and then in our bootstrap, we're just saying we want to register this items reducer and the selected item reducer. And then now the question is, now that I have this reducer that's feeding into the store, how do I get data out of the store? Well, with store.select. And then if you need to combine multiple results, then you can use combine latest. I did. So you can see here in the items component, we're saying give me the selected item. And so it's store.select, selected item. And so then it basically takes the state of selected item and wraps that in an observable. And then in your item details component, you can pass that in and bind to it. So anytime the selected item changes, that it will automatically update. So for instance, just to see this, and we've seen this quite a bit, but so now anytime I click this I am essentially setting the selected item in the store. We'll see how that's happening in just a moment, but you'll notice that it's just automatically updating. So the items list, capturing that event, saying, hey, select item, and then select item gets set in the store, and then it just basically streams down to this item details component. And so this is state down. Now the question is, how does stuff, user interactions, and different things get up? So we capture events, and they go, events, they're transformed into actions, and then we dispatch them to be handled by the reducer. So this has a type and a payload, and then based on that type, the reducer takes that payload and will return a new state. So again, events flow up. In some cases, you may go straight to the store, or in other cases, for asynchronous operations, you will delegate that action item, basically dispatch, to a service. So in the case of this sample application, when somebody selects an item from the items list, that event gets bubbled up to the app component, and then the app component just goes ahead and sets select item directly on the store. In the case of an item being updated, a single item, that event with the new item basically goes up to the app component, gets delegated, app component hands that off to item service, it does an asynchronous operation, and on completion, it sends it into the items store. And so we dispatch action objects via store dispatch, like so. So when somebody selects an item in the select item method, we're calling this.store.dispatch, and we are basically forming an action object, and we're saying this is the type of select item and payload of item that was selected. Now, currently I'm using just strings for this, but I would say on a large application, I did this for demonstration purposes, and I think in part just naivete, if I could say that word, by just being naive, there we go, that I just used raw strings, but generally you would kind of extract these out into constants and then use them to reference, or even create like an actions table of available actions. So probably not at a large scale. What I recommend just using strings within the just directly. So